My name is Maciej Sokolowski. I'm a visiting researcher at Meiji University, Japan. I also represent the Faculty of Law and Administration in the University of Warsaw. Today, I would like to talk a bit about the special issue that I co-edited with Professor Raphael Heffron. The special issue in energy policy, that's a leading energy journal, and the topic of the special issue is energy policy failures. And when we started the work on this special issue, together with Professor Heffron, together with Raphael, we had a general idea on this new project that came from the gap in the literature on energy policy, where we did not find a very general framework on something that is well anchored generally in the literature, in different studies, in different fields, which is failure, which is learning from failure. And we have found some case studies where this notion of energy policy failure or those collapsed incentives, those lost projects, those ideas that did not achieve the success appear, but we did not observe a framework, a general approach, kind of a cap or umbrella that could be put over those case studies. So in the literature on energy policy, in energy studies, different type of studies, regulatory studies, or those of a legal, social, or even economy background, you won't find the very universal approach to energy policy failure. And what we think is that this type of attitude where the energy policy failure is addressed is very useful for the needs of conducting the energy transition towards climate neutrality or carbon neutrality, as you can call it, in 2050 or earlier or later. That's why we think this approach is very useful, because as in other studies or in everyday life or different activities, or even like in sport, you have those failures that always accompany the individual or the company, as I mentioned, or the sport team. Yeah, our favorite sport team, for instance. Some only have those failures in their history, but the failure is a very important element of, as I mentioned, of our everyday activity or our history, as we had many different failures behind us. So, and we also have this approach of learning from failure. That's why we wanted to propose this for the energy community. So all those researchers and scholars interested in energy studies, and that's why last year we launched a special issue that was approved by the editorial committee of the energy policy. We are very grateful for this action, and what we observe, how they treat this special issue. I mean, those colleagues from energy policy, the journal, is a kind of a comeback return to this old, good, traditional discussion about energy policy, where the policy matters, because at the center, at the heart of this special issue, we have this energy policy, but in this negative sense, presented in this negative sense, so presented through a prism of a failure of all those mistakes that happened. And as I mentioned, we did an initial research on this field, and we observed that in the vast amount of items related to energy policy, climate policy, etc., we won't find something very general, something universal that discusses the energy policy failure. There are some case studies, and of course, apart from this literature, the research, so something interesting for our discussion, our online event that we will have soon. The energy policy failures is like a boomerang that comes back in different policy discussion when politicians use it as an accusation or an argument that appears in the parliamentary discussion or even on the streets when the policymakers use it in confrontations with their supporters or opponents. Yeah, they simply use it as an argument. That's why I mentioned is a kind of boomerang. But let's use my Japanese context, my Japanese perspective. So energy policy failure is also like a nunchaku. Yeah, I have one here. Yeah, don't do it at home. It's very dangerous. But as nunchaku or any kind of bat or stick, it has this two endings. Yeah. So this energy policy is like this, and energy policy failure too, because a failure can give you a success, as I mentioned, if we observe it rightly and we have those lessons learned, or it can simply be this failure. Yeah. So again, be this let's say the bad part of this bat. Yeah, something that can come back and just hit you. Yeah. So as like me practicing nunchaku, I observe this. So it can be also very harmful for the one who enjoys practicing it. So again, it can be very useful, but it can be also very problematic. So if left alone, if left without this lessons learned, it's again just a mistake. It's again just a failure, or it can be a complete failure. Such situations also happens. Yeah. So what we did in our paper that has been recently published is that we offered this framework, and I'm sure that Professor Heffron Raphael will talk about this framework, where we added those elements of energy transition with energy justice to it. But apart from our paper, we have a bunch of extremely interesting case studies, because this special issue was based on the call for papers. We received a lot of proposals from colleagues from all parts of the world, who either individually or in teams offered their ideas on energy policy failures with different case studies presented, those collapse initiatives, those lost projects, etc. But naturally, we had to make a selection, and even though we invited, let's say, more let's say very good authors with very good ideas, some of them were lost in the review process. It's just a practice of every journal, but we are very close to the end of the publication process, and soon we'll reveal other case studies related to this framework on energy policy failure. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we believe that together with this team of wonderful researchers from different parts of the world, we can offer some lessons learned from those fallen initiatives, from those lost projects, from those energy policy failures, with a support of this framework, with a new definition of energy policy failure, with goals that are not reached, but with the added energy justice to them. And here I can simply recommend reading this paper, but also those case studies, because as I mentioned, these case studies are important, because this perspective is again, it's like a boomerang, or the tool I presented, so the Japanese nunchaku. Yeah, so we can have this double perspective here. with all the strengths and taken from this lost projects, yeah, and all this weakness or all this negatives, and those elements that didn't work, which can be petrified, which can be then continued, yeah. But I believe in the positive scenarios, and that was the aim of the special issue. That was the center of this idea, the very initial idea behind this special issue, that we can learn those lessons from mistakes, and that's a very human approach. Thank you very much for this, and I'm very open for your questions during our active session. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.